Hi, this is Mark from LongIslandWatch.com, and I'm here today to talk to you about some of the new tariffs you might have been hearing about here in the U.S. I'm going to be discussing the tariffs as they pertain to the exports from China and Hong Kong into the U.S. I'm not dealing with the whole Canada, Mexico thing. Those have been pushed off, and plus watches weren't even a part of that anyway. We're talking about, you may have heard of two things. The de minimis exclusion or exemption and the 10% tariff on Chinese goods. I want to discuss those two things in depth, and then we'll work out a scenario and see how it affects a normal consumer who wants to buy a watch off of AliExpress and import it here into the States. And then I'll really get into the details. I have customs breakdown sheets here from a recent delivery, and I'll show you how tariffs play into my imports when I import watches that are made in China or other distribution that comes out of China, and how it affects my pricing and my costs. Very eye-opening, I think. You know me, I'm very transparent about this stuff. So the first thing that I want to discuss with you is this de minimis exclusion or exemption you may have been hearing about. It's been around forever. Well, not forever, but it's been $800 for a long time. $800, by the way, as a de minimis exemption is really high in worldwide terms. We have one of the highest de minimis exemptions out of any country, industrialized or whatever. What does this $800 mean? Well, it means that anywhere in the world that you travel, when you come back to the States, you can bring in $800 worth of commercial goods and not be taxed on it. So anything under $800, no tax. Anything over $800, you will pay tax, a tariff. Okay, it's not, if you bring in something for $805, you don't get taxed on the $5 over $800, you get taxed on the full $805. Just kind of remember that. But anyway, you get taxed according to a tariff schedule. The HTS is an extremely large document with 99 subchapters, and you can look at it yourself. Just type in HTS chapter 91, and that is wristwatches, and it will come up from the website, and you can read it to your heart's content. So when you bring something in from overseas, you have an $800 exemption. So if you are home in whatever state in the US and you order a watch off of AliExpress and it's $400, it sails through customs. There is nothing due by you. If you happen to buy a watch though and it's $805 or $810, technically, if they declared full value, which they have to, that's the law, technically, you will pay a tariff on it. And how is that tariff worked out? Well, we'll get into that in a second. But what you need to know is that the administration has been talking about rolling back that de minimis exemption for China and Hong Kong from $800, I guess, down to $0. So that everything that's imported into the States from China and Hong Kong will be subject to a tariff, as if it was over $800. The way the tariffs work on wristwatches are, you go to the schedule, you look up the size, the jewels, the material, blah, 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 and it tells you the movement is taxed at $1, the case is taxed at 40% of the case value, like 7% of the case value, and the bracelet is taxed at 4% of the bracelet value, whatever, and you pay that tariff, okay? That's how tariffs work. By getting rid of this de minimis exemption, every single freaking item that comes in from China or Hong Kong to the US, which is a lot, will have to go through some sort of informal customs clearance. Over $2,500, that's where you get into formal customs clearance. And that's this mess here that I file probably almost every day. Well, FedEx files it or DHL files it on my behalf. But that's a whole mess, formal clearance. But it breaks it down, so we will check it out. So like I said, so by rolling back this $800 de minimis, everything gets taxed. What's going to happen, though, is that the borders here for products coming in will get overwhelmed because they're not set up for this. So they did roll back or push off the change for the de minimis exemption of $800 from China and Hong Kong. It's supposed to be reenacted at a later date, but for now, as I'm filming this, February 12th, 2025, the de minimis still exists. Now keep in mind, the $800 exemption is still going to exist for every other country goods into the US. They're just looking at rolling it back for China and Hong Kong. So that's the first thing I want you to know, how that works. The second thing you need to know is how items are taxed. So as I said, wristwatches come in and you go to a schedule. Forget the de minimis exemption. And as I said, you look at it and the movement is like $1.35, and you break down the watch into its constituents. It goes by, ready? Three things of a watch: the value of the movement, the value of the case, and the value of the bracelet. We say, Mark, there's a lot more than that. That's okay, you just include it all in there. So the dial, the hands, the bezel, that's all included in the case. The bracelet, the clasp, that's included in the bracelet, or the strap, whatever it might be. And you go to this really long drawn out schedule and you get your tax rate. And it's very definitive. It's not like open to interpretation. It strictly says what the movement is taxed at, what the case is taxed at, and what the bracelet is taxed at. Now, you guys may remember during the first administration of the current president, he did enact some tariffs on stuff coming from China. They are still in effect for wristwatches. When you import a wristwatch, or when I do in bulk, 9201, 2190, that's like one of the really more popular tariff codes for watches. However, because they come from China, they also fall under another tariff code called 9903-8815. I live by this code. And it says that the first tariff that you pay, that's fine, you pay that. There's an additional tariff of 7.5%. It was lowered, I don't know, a couple of years ago. 7.5% of actual value. Now what's happening? You may have heard this 10%. That 10% extra tariff is going to be another legislative additional tariff on goods coming from China. Going further and further. So wristwatches definitely applies. So now, if you import a wristwatch from China, assume there's no de minimis exemption, and it's a $100 wristwatch, okay? Let's just assume it's $100. You'll pay the regular tariff, or duty, whatever you want to call it, of the dollar, plus the 7%, plus the 4%, whatever. Let's say it amounts, usually tariffs amount to be around 9 to 10% on wristwatches. So you pay about $10 in base tariffs. Then there's the 7.5% from subchapter 9903-8815. So that's going to be another $7.5. And now, hello, there's an extra 10%, another $10. So you're looking at 10 plus 750 plus about another 10. So about $27.50 in taxes on a $100 watch. So roughly 28-30% or so is what the tariff is going to amount to be. And hopefully that extra 10% will get rolled back eventually. However, that 10% is stuck. It's there now, but the de minimis exemption is back in effect. So if you import something for $400 from China, you won't pay any tariffs. It floats right under it. So I'm kind of burying the lead there. So let's get into the two different scenarios, okay? Scenario number one, you're purchasing a watch off of AliExpress tomorrow, the 13th, if nothing changes, hopefully. You will basically, as long as it's under $800 declared value, you will basically pay face value of what it is. You will not pay a tariff. However, once the de minimis exemption is rolled back, if it is rolled back, you will be on the hook for an informal customs clearing, which the post office, FedEx, DHL, they all do that. That's their job. You will have to pay a regular tariff. You'll pay the 7.5% China tariff that was put in place many years ago, and you'll have to pay a 10% China tariff. And then whoever clears it for you, whether it be DHL, FedEx, US Mail, whatever, you will pay a brokerage fee because they have to do these calculations, and these calculations are not for free. So yeah, watches that you import from overseas do have the propensity to start costing a lot more money. So in the first example I just gave you, that was you or somebody purchasing a watch for themselves from China online and getting it delivered. So now how does it affect somebody that imports watches in bulk and resells here in the States? So I wanted to bring up some duties I recently paid. And again, the whole $800 de minimis thing totally doesn't exist for this case because we imported well over $100,000 in watches in this single shipment. However, it all makes perfect sense, and you may not agree with it, but it makes perfect sense when it all breaks down. So this is something where we imported 100 pieces of 3 different SKUs. And the people who shipped it to me classified it under HCS code 9102-21. You can easily type it into Google and it'll bring up, as I said, it'll bring up the harmonized tariff system or whatever it stands for, and you can read about it. You can go down through all the subheadings and bullet points and read the taxes. It really makes a lot of sense. Again, may not agree with it, but it's very easy to follow. So this is what they declared as the export. They said, well, the movement in the watch is worth $94. The stainless steel case is worth $73, and the stainless steel bracelet was worth $41. Add all those up, and I did pay $208 for this watch. I had 100 of them, so you pull that out to here, it's $20,800. So what is this information used for? Well, that's used to calculate the tariff. And this is a regular FedEx. I get this from FedEx, but this is a CBP 7501 form. And this is part of the formal clearance process. However, again, it would be the same for anything that you import, just not in such a formal fashion. But it breaks it down into 3 line items. So 1, 2, and then 3. So the first line, you can kind of read it and figure out what it's talking about. It's talking about a watch movement that's greater than 17 joules. That's the code it falls under. There's 300 of them because, again, this was 100 each. So there's 300 in total. Value is $28,200. The movement is taxed at $1.53 per movement. So for this entire shipment of 300 units, whatever these movements were, that's the tax, $459. And then you have an MPF, that's a processing fee. Everybody loves fees, $100. Okay, so now we get into stuff that's from China. So the movement in this watch was not from China, but the case was. So the case for the watch falls under code 7020. There's 300 of them, and it's taxed at 4.2% of case value. That was $73 times 300, okay, remember? Brings up the case was $73. I have 300 of them. So 4.2% of that is $919, a little material processing fee. But we have our friend that I talked about him before, our friend 99038815, and he is an overarching 7.5% tax, tariff, whatever, on any goods coming from China that fall under this tax code. Virtually every watch tax code, and there's a whole bunch of them, but they all fall under 99038815 as a special legislation, and that is 7.5% of value, and that is $1642.50. So 7.5% of $21,900, $1642.50. Okay, so adding all these numbers up, this is the tax that I pay on the watches. And then we have the bracelet. You could read everything again. The bracelet falls under 7030. $12,300 worth of bracelets, because the bracelets are $41 each. There's 300 of them. Bracelets on this tariff code here are taxed at 9.8% of value. So $1,205, little material processing fee. And then, again, we have this 7.5%, which is going to give me another $900 in tax. You add all these up. Okay, I did the math. This is $5,363 in taxes, and it equates to about 8.5% of the total value of the wristwatch. Now, that extra 10% that went into effect just recently is not on here because this was done well before that. That would affect these 2 line items. So we would see an extra charge of $21,900, so $2,190, and we'd see an extra charge of $1,230, which would be an extra $3,420 in duty on this shipment. So $3,420 plus 53, it's appreciable, right? It's gonna push this up to a little bit over 10%. Of total value. So again, the 10% just fell under the components, but you can see how this is going to make, now here's an extra $3,420 that I am going to pay on an import. What do I do then? Do I raise the price of the item? I don't know. Do I lower salaries of employees? I don't know. I got to do something to make up for this shortfall. Or do I just suck it up and hopefully the 10% disappears eventually and, we'll still sell watches because we didn't raise the prices? I don't know at this point. I'll figure it out. I'm one of those guys that I will cross that bridge when I come to it. However, I think it's important enough for you to realize that this 10% thing is really appreciable for wholesalers, vendors like myself. The de minimis $800 exemption is really, really appreciable for people like you that are buying singly stuff. I guess a quick case in point, I sell San Martin watches. I've paid the duty on them already. I went through the whole rigmarole. So if you purchase them from me, you won't pay any tariff. But there could be a day in the future where you purchase a San Martin from AliExpress and your $300 San Martin winds up costing you $340 because of the tariffs. Anyway, that's it. Mark from LongIslandWatch.com. I hope I didn't bore you to death. I hope you learned something. That's it. Questions, comments. Guys, again, I'm just delivering the news. I don't want political stuff. I don't care. I'm just telling you how it affects all of us. And that's it. You can like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Questions, comments, anything else you want to say. Again, put it down below. Be nice. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.